A near 8-year campaign by a mum whose son tragically lost his life concluded in last week's Tynwald when a law that makes it easier for people to donate their organs was brought into force. Later in the programme we'll hear from campaigner Diane Taylor and former MHK Martin Perkins, who tell of their pride in finally seeing this through. We also hear Speaker of the House of Keys, Ewan Watterson's view on the health overspend and minimum wage. But first, Health Minister Claire Christian explains what her department and Manx Care are doing to turn around the island's health finances.
So we have a cost improvement programme, and they were able to deliver on that cost improvement programme, but yet we are still asking for a supplementary vote, and to understand that that is the reasons why behind that, that we face those financial challenges as every other NHS trust does in the UK. I think I quoted, I think it was 41 out of 42, or it might have been 40 out of 41 trusts are all overspending because they are facing the same pressures. But I think yesterday, Phil, was really important because as a health minister, what I intend to do is to gain the trust of my colleagues and to gain the trust of the Isle of Man public to firstly say we are reviewing, making sure that we are putting in place all of the efficiencies where we can, and identifying that and working extremely at full pace to make sure we deliver on that, so that when we come forward, which will be the start for me in terms of the next year's process, I'll be at that point in September, whereas I haven't had that luxury for this year. When I come forward to Treasury, I want to be very confident in saying, this is where we are underfunded, and this is where we are overspending, and we have made these efficiencies, but it may take some time for us to see those efficiencies over a period of time. So that kind of level of detail is really essential for me, and certainly that's what I'm striving for.
There have been reports of a 1.2 million overspend already this year, first 2 months of the year. Presumably you'd be very concerned to hear about things like that. I mean, can you confirm that is the case?
So that's absolutely the case. Manx Care had their board meeting last week. We obviously had, after their board meeting, we have our quarterly assurance meeting. So it's immediately we are challenging them on this and working together with them on what they can do to bring that back to balance. And they, whilst it's forecasting a 2 million overspend for the year, that is a very different position to where we were this time last year, where they were forecasting somewhere in the region of 18 million. Now, I was very, very clear yesterday, and we will implement what we can and where we can and at full force. But I can't make those guarantees that we won't be overspent because of external geo factors. That there are a great many factors that may mean that we need additional funding, and that's the part that is important, that we are clear, transparent and honest about why those reasons are.
And I guess for the health department, unlike many of the other departments of government, I mean the Department of Infrastructure, if it looks as though it's overspending, can just cancel a few road projects. If you cancel lots and lots of operations, then people will suffer as a result. So it's I guess a more difficult role to try and fulfill in ensuring that you do come in on budget.
Yeah, and I think that whilst we talk about the finances, what's first and foremost on my mind is delivering quality care, high quality care service, and being able to do that when there is cost pressures is a difficult job to do. But this, the outcomes for patients is always in my meetings. That's the first thing I want to know. What's the outcome for the patient? How does it improve? Are we making efficiencies that is right for them? And there will be Phil. Some difficult decisions as we try and expand services. Can we afford to do that? And of course, with all the goodwill in the world, I'd want to be able to do that. But if the government finances just doesn't have that at this stage, but we may be able to plan for in the future.
What sort of things are these efficiencies that are being talked about? Because it's not always clear generally speaking, when the public hear the words efficiencies, they think cuts. So what kinds of things are being done that generate savings?
So we're currently looking at job planning, which was something that was raised yesterday, and job planning in terms of our workforce. And it's really, really important that how that making more efficiencies within the job planning, and that we need our colleagues to work with us to be able to do that. And that process, again, can, getting people to agree that and sign up to that can take a little time, because it's how people work and how they're contracted. So we have a really, really I wouldn't say hard, but a lot of work to do in that sense to get that right. But job planning is there will be efficiencies with that. There are obviously efficiencies, and we announced some efficiencies in terms of and not efficiencies necessarily in terms of monetary, but in terms of how our productivity, and I think that's where, so how many more operations can we deliver within the same amount of time, space, etc. So I think that is really important. So it doesn't always have a cost efficiency as the outcome, but it can have a lead to a reduced waiting time or a better outcome for a patient. So as I said, we announced ward changes recently. And that was one of the ward changes was about setting up a dedicated frailty ward. So when people come into the A&E, there will be this area where they can be have access to, and specifically for those that are elderly and more frail, and that's a better outcome, and again, it's not necessarily concentrating on a cost efficiency, but what it does do is it helps the ED department with other areas, and other people can see, the rest of the population can then carry on and see the consultants, etc. I think I've explained that okay,
and
in my layman terms.
So then, finally, then, is it about 6 months you've been in the role now? Maybe slightly more than. Is it as daunting now as it was when you first got in there? I'm
completely invested in this now, Phil, and I think if I'd be really truthful, I wasn't expecting to feel this way quite so quickly. But I think when you're working, we're all working, the department, etc., but then the team, we're all working extreme hours to really try and do the best we can. And I think when you've invested that, you just want to have the outcomes that you hope for. And as I said, I will try to be honest when we haven't reached those outcomes, and we need to do more work, and I think the public will hopefully respect that and appreciate that honesty.
So in summary then, we're not likely to see a 15 million overspend this year, but you can't give guarantees that there won't be some need for a supplementary vote.
And I think you're right to say where, what's the sort of line, where do we expect it to be? I think the good thing is that we are looking at, already we're at a better position than we were last year. And a lot of that has been to do with aligning the mandate with the operating plan at the same time. And whilst members were critical of that, or critical of some of the mandated objectives and the operating objectives, it was far more honest about what we can deliver with the budget that we have. So you are seeing a result of that. But absolutely there could be in-year costs. One of the things that it's typical. It's parliamentary. You know, we're in politics here. You have one member saying, "Be more open, be truthful, be transparent about what you can do," Mr. Hooper, and then you have another member saying, you know, it's ridiculous that you think you need more money for something we've delivered in terms of the TT, and I was very clear about that actually. We're being open about it. Of course, Manx Care have allocated budget year on year for for providing services during the TT. Of course they do, but I've been very clear to them. Look, if you review that, when you review that, if you are over and above that allocated, we need to discuss it, and we need to be talking to our the DFE, talking to the government about Treasury, etc., about what impact that has on our budgets. We can't just ignore it and bury our head. We have to be really open about that, and there will be different areas that we need to do that and talk about it.
That was Douglas South MHK Claire Christian. Next, Speaker Watterson on the living wage.
Tynwald's had a policy since 2021, based on the Poverty Committee's recommendations, that the minimum wage should align with the living wage. And that's put together based on the cost of living, what it costs to engage in society and be able to afford to live and work on the Isle of Man and be better off in work. And that is, we think, a really important benchmark to work to. That's why I put down the amendment that I did to maintain that link with the living wage and the minimum wage. Government's decided to move away from that, and I think that's a retrograde step.
In reality, though, I guess what government is looking for is something that's relatively easy and simple to benchmark, and I imagine that what they've come up with isn't going to be that far off what you would have ended up with had you done a more complicated calculation and followed the route that you were talking about.
Well, it's fortunate that at the moment the figures don't work out too much different. And the figure that government is coming out with is 98% of the figure that the living wage comes out with. But the living wage is now well established. It's a well established formula. It's something that is understood. It's produced annually. It's produced according to a timetable, just like the living wage. So just like the average wage calculations and the median wage calculations. So it's no more or less complicated, and they're still going to be producing the living wage reports. So I don't particularly buy the argument that it's simpler. What it does do is it divorces the minimum wage from the cost of living on this island, and that's the big schism that I'm worried about going forward.
And of course that's what you would imagine a living wage, or indeed the minimum wage, should be addressing. I mean, knowing that you get a percentage of the median wage of people working on the Isle of Man probably isn't as relevant as knowing that you're going to have a wage that is sufficient to cover the costs that you incur on a daily basis.
Yeah, and it doesn't matter to people whether they're getting 66% of the Joneses. What matters to people is, can they afford to put the essentials on the table? Can they afford the roof over their head? And can they afford their phone and utilities? They're the sort of things that really matter to people. That's why the living wage calculation is far more important than a percentage of the median wage.
I mean, you and I both know that these sorts of things are often thrashed out in advance of getting to the Tynwald sitting. Has there been any attempt to talk to government to say maybe we should try and do this in a different way?
Well, yes, but this is a narrative that goes back to the foundation of the Select Committee on Poverty in 2018, the recommendation in 2021, that the evidence is in there for this, and they tried to reiterate that evidence yesterday without sort of labouring the point. So the government has made an active decision to move away from that methodology, and I think that's a retrograde step.
You also had some comments on the inward migration motion that David Ashford brought forward. I mean, it's the recommendations are relatively straightforward. They're hardly controversial, but Tynwald found a full 2.25 hours to focus on this.
Yeah, just always the debate. You'll know well, Phil. The debates where we agree always take longer than ones we disagree with. There was the acceptance that I think that we are headed in the right direction, that we are headed in the same direction. That the recommendation that was printed on the page was almost unanimously, I think it was unanimously approved. I think there was an opportunity in there to sort of raise concerns around the way that the immigration system is working, areas where it's perhaps not fulfilling its potential, and areas where there's concern out there in the wider community, and some of that myth busting that I tried to do in my contribution about where the Isle of Man is not a place where people can seek asylum. The Isle of Man is still a place where it is very difficult to walk into and get benefits. There are a handful of cases. There were 14 benefits cases in the last year, 10 housing cases in the last 5 years, where the residency criteria haven't been met. And I think there needs to be more openness about when they are, why that's happening. We had some of that in the debate, and that was really refreshing to hear some of those reasons. But it does belie some of the myths that are out there of widespread immigration of people who aren't working, and it's just not true. And it was an opportunity to perhaps bust some of those myths as well.
But I suppose myths become or generated when people see an awful lot of things similar to this happening in other parts of the British Isles.
And that's it. So you have to be careful about sort of interpreting what you're getting in the news in the UK, where people can cross the channel in small boats and claim asylum in the UK. That's not something that can happen on the Isle of Man. You cannot claim asylum on the Isle of Man. You cannot just walk in here and claim benefits. So there are big differences in our administrations, and for good reason, and they're quite rightly so. And so I think we just need to make sure that those are spelled out quite clearly for the benefit of our populace. And I think that they are widely supported in the community, the fact we do have such high residential criteria.
And I suppose the other complexity surrounding all this is we actually do need more people coming in to the Isle of Man to work.
We absolutely do, and that's been a point that we've needed more people coming into the Isle of Man for many, many years. And you look at the population balance of the Isle of Man, it's just under half born on the Isle of Man, and that's not something that's new. It's also about making sure that the people who are coming here are contributing, that they are not bringing other problems that are going to cost the public purse more money to solve than the economic value that they're bringing. And there are these sorts of issues that do need to be sort of squared in terms of making sure that the immigration that we're getting is really adding the value into our economy.
And final question really in relation to the health motion, the overspend. Are we ever going to crack this? Are we ever going to have a position where we have a year where the health minister doesn't come back for an overspend?
Well, I suppose I'm proud to say that I was in the Department of Health and Social Security the last year. It didn't overspend. I think we've created a system where we've got a sort of triumvirate between Treasury, between DHSC and Manx Care. And because they're all making different decisions at different times, it's not pulling together. So we're making the budget in February, the mandate's coming out at a different time, and the operation plan's coming out around about the same time as the mandate. That's a big problem, because you're not then triangulating those issues. If you don't have a service specification that is something you can actually afford, then you're going to have a problem, and that's the problem that is repeating itself in the Manx Care era.
Manx Care was created with a great fanfare, and this was going to be a way in which it was depoliticising the whole health debate. Mm-hmm. Do you think that's worked?
No, I don't think it has worked. I say, in solving some problems, it's created others. So it has created some solutions around sort of having ministers being responsible for making some decisions around treatments and drugs and availability, and that's shedding more light on those through the mandate process. But it has created this disconnect between what we can afford and what we're specifying as a service, and then landing Manx Care to deliver something. If you know it's going to cost £100 to produce something, but someone wants 1.5 of them, you just can't do that. And that's the problem that needs squaring. And until we get Treasury, DHSC, and Manx Care on the same sort of budget and service specification timescale, it's just not going to work. It would also help if Manx Care had the data to know how much actual treatments cost. And I think there's still a big gap in the data internally there as well.
Russian MHK Ewan Watterson there. Next, former Garth MHK Martin Perkins.
I've always been passionate about social things, and I had a friend who family was involved with organ transplantation, and I realised the difference that one donor can make by giving their organs to somebody who is really in need of a new kidney or a new heart or whatever it is. It completely transforms their lives. And one of the things I always will never forget was that when you have the recipients' families meeting up with the donors' families, the recipients' families never forget that their good fortune is a result of another family's tragedy. And then the other side of the coin is the donor families actually take solace in the fact that their loved ones' organs have gone on to help so many different people. And by getting that organised and allowing that to take place, it does make the world a lot better place. Well, prior to this legislation, the relatives had to be asked, would you allow your loved one's organs to be donated? And that's a difficult question. And it put the pressure on the family dramatically. This new legislation, what it says is that everybody is opted in unless you opt out. And the family are still asked, nevertheless, they're still asked, did your loved one ever change their mind? They've signed up the registry, they've ticked the box of all the organs they want them to donate. Did you ever hear them change their mind? And if the answer to that is from the relatives or the friends of the donor, it's actually, yeah, last Sunday lunchtime he changed his mind, the donation would not go ahead. That's a very unusual case. Normally speaking, people do not change their mind, and the island is fantastic. I think the percentage is something like 65% of people have opted in, compared to the UK, which is something in the mid-50s, I think. So the island's a very philanthropic place, and I think it's to do with our community atmosphere that people really want to help other people. And of course, I was very disappointed when I lost my seat in Tynwald, but I was determined that this piece of social legislation wasn't going to lie down and disappear. And so behind the scenes, I've been tweaking a few people and trying to get things together, and the drafters have been tremendous. They've picked it up in the last couple of years, and it is quite complex. I mean, some of the human tissue rules and regulations, and all the, for example, you don't even think of it, but the museum with human artifacts and stuff like that they display, that has all got to be legislated for and put in its place. The human ethics and research has got to be dealt with. And it's all this smaller bits of legislation, umpteen things that go to make up the human tissue side of it, is where the complexity has actually been. But as we've seen today, we've finally got it over the line. David Ashworth's managed to get it over the line, and it's a good day for the Isle of Man.
Former MHK and mover of the Organ Donation Act, Martin Perkins. Finally, Diane Taylor, whose son Daniel Boyd tragically lost his life, and some of Daniel's organs helped others live healthier lives.
That has been a long time coming, and there was a period when I thought that it was never going to happen. I understand now more why it's taken so long. When there's times when you're going out and telling Daniel's story, it is hard. But I think of the positive impact that it has been having. We know that just under 60,000 of the Manx public have already registered their organ donation wishes, which means there's probably just under 25,000 people that are still to make, their decisions. So, some days it is really hard today. I thought I would be more emotional. I think I'm just so happy now that it has gone through, and I'm just so proud of Daniel, and he would do anything to help anybody else. I read a story after he died that he'd paid some bullies to stop bullying his friend, because that was the sort of person that he was. He just wanted to help people, and I know that he'd have the biggest smile today, knowing that his legacy will hopefully encourage people, and he'll always live on with his dad and I, but he will live on forever now.
And of course, what has happened effectively today is that Tynwald has voted to bring in the necessary legislation to allow, effectively people can opt out of organ donation rather than what has been the case of opting in. And that opting in meant that you were left in an incredibly traumatic time with having to make decisions about Daniel's organs.
I think, even with the law, it is still down to everybody to make their own choices, and most importantly to tell your nearest and dearest, because they will be consulted. and let them honour your final wishes, whichever way it is. It's just, I've heard people saying that it's taken away people's decisions, but the law is there to encourage people to make their own choices, so that your next of kin knows. It's not taking that away from you. In that respect, nothing has changed, but it does highlight organ donation, and I think more people, those that haven't already registered, will have their thoughts. So it's a massive big step forward, and it will, I hope, give hope to the 12 people waiting on the Isle of Man for a transplant, and those across England, Scotland, Wales, Guernsey, Jersey and Ireland. It's not just for the Isle of Man. So that's my biggest hope, is that people will talk about it, they'll make their decision, and we're giving hope to those waiting. There's children on the transplant list, so let's hope for their parents. This gives them more hope.
And would you have started down this route if you'd have known it was going to take as long as it's taken?
Yes, I would have done. You just don't know. I've been lucky enough to sit in on some of the meetings, so I understand and see. Well, I've heard just how technical and how involved it is. There's no stone they've not sort of uncovered. So it's 110% right. And yes, I did get impatient, but we're here now, so that doesn't matter anymore. It's done.
And now terribly proud, I guess.
Immensely proud of Daniel. He would have the cheekiest, massive big smile today. Knowing that his legacy is going to help other people, just like he did.
That was campaigner Diane Taylor. Apologies for the somewhat noisy background there. So what do you think? Would you have the mettle and perseverance to pursue this lengthy campaign? I'm Phil Gaughan. Guramayo. Thanks for listening.